Hi, I'm Marty Murray, Chief Curriculum and Content Officer with Target Test Prep. And today we're going to be talking about GMAT Verbal in a few different ways to get you all set for your GMAT Verbal preparation to really rock this thing. If anybody wanted to put in the comments where you're from today, whether it's day, morning, night, what's going on, how you feel about GMAT Verbal, please let me know. I'm excited to be here and talk about this stuff and really get this down. So let me set up my presentation. Okay, so today it's all about GMAT verbal preparation, what you should do, and very importantly as well, what you shouldn't do, because there's so many things out there that people hear about GMAT verbal that aren't really accurate. And if you do those things, you can waste a lot of time. You'll be wondering why your score is going up, or is not going up rather. You're wondering what you need to do. You might get frustrated. So today we're going to really nail how to prepare for GMAT Verbal, what to do, a few different angles to set you up to nail this thing. Okay, so our first thing we want to talk about is typically a lot of people start off preparing for GMAT Verbal by just looking for a million practice questions. You start off sentence correction. Let me do 20 sentence correction questions a day. Then I'm going to do 10 more critical reasoning questions after that. I'm going to hit the RC. I'm going to really get this down and answer a lot of practice questions. Okay. And you know, honestly, there is a place for doing practice questions, obviously, in preparing for GMAT Verbal. But all of our time is limited, right? And we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We really want to get this down in the most efficient way possible, make sure we're learning it the whole bit, right? So the best way actually to work on GMAT Verbal is work on it one topic at a time. Work on it one topic at a time. Okay, so you're going to start off with sentence correction. And you can even start off with subtopics like modifiers, subject-verb agreement, things like that, so that you're really getting this thing down one topic at a time and fully understanding something. This goes for GMAT Quant too. Okay, if you work on it one topic at a time and nail things down, you can learn, you know, the topic, hit the questions, and then since you're doing questions that are the same as each other, you're going to learn from the questions. You're going to teach yourself question by question in that one topic. Okay, so the strategy is to first learn the concepts, right? And the strategies involved in the topic. And then practice with the questions involving that one topic. Okay, so for instance, in subject verb agreement, you can go through and learn, well, how do they hide the subject verb agreement? What are different types of subject verb agreement? All these different aspects of subject verb agreement. Then you go practice with subject verb agreement questions, and you know you're going to nail this, right? Because you have the concepts at the ready, you have the strategies at the ready, and you're ready to go answer the questions. And this is what you're going to achieve. You're not going to be reinventing the wheel, right? You're going to make your practice much more valuable, because instead of reinventing the wheel and going, gosh, you know, what do I need to do when there's a modifier between the subject and the verb? You're going to learn that first. You're going to learn to cross off that modifier. So then when you're practicing, you're going to be practicing applying what you've learned. And you can see how much more efficient this process is, right? I mean, we can all go through questions and go, well, why did I miss that? And that is another important part of preparing for GMAT Verbal. But it works much better if you know things ahead of time, and then you just practice applying what you've already learned. So you know all these different subject-verb agreement rules, or the strategies, how to go through the questions, or critical reasoning. You know what to look for in the argument. So when you're doing the question, okay, I know that I need to look for the conclusion. Great. Now you know that. You don't have to discover that on your own. Instead, you're learning to execute well, right? You're learning to apply what you've learned. So it works so well to learn the concepts and strategies first, and then apply them and learn to execute well. So that's our first thing we're going to do. Rather than do a million questions, just jump into it. And you know, there's part of the reason why people do this in verbal more than quant is because we think, well, verbal is just it's just words. What could be so hard? right? And we're going to talk about that some more. But it's words, yeah, but they're put into questions in ways that make them tricky, and they're key strategies we can use to answer the questions, and key concepts that if we know them, we'll get these questions correct much more of the time. So learning the concepts and strategies first, and then applying what you've learned and learning to execute well, because really so much of GMAT Verbal comes down to how well can we execute, okay? Now let's talk about the next thing. Okay, so as we're doing this, we're talking about learning methods and strategies and concepts. So a huge don't of preparing for GMAT Verbal is don't learn GMAT gimmicky methods that don't really work, okay? This is huge. And there's so many things out there that people talk about that, oh, these are supposedly work. Look, this is a pretty sophisticated test. It's a test for graduate school, right? It's a test for business school. So the excuse me, I hit the wrong thing, but it's a test for business school, right? So we want to, so it's going to be fairly sophisticated, you know. So we have to really, we have to prepare and and we have to prepare for it and look and think of it as something that's sophisticated, that the gimmicky, the methods aren't going to work. We have to treat the questions as sophisticated. Okay. So now I got to just get back to my screen share here. Give me a second. I was just trying to get rid of the stop sharing option that was getting in all our way, and I stopped sharing. Okay. Let me do this right this time. Okay. So anyway, okay, so we don't want to learn gimmicky methods that don't work. We want to treat these questions with respect. Okay, they're written to test our ability to reason logically, to notice key details, to work our way through these sentences and really understand whether they're a plan for something that works. This is a preparation for business school. It's a test for business school. So we want to make sure we're doing this in a sophisticated way, right? Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at a question, and this is going to illustrate a couple of things that matter for GMAT prep. So in addition to illustrating this gimmicky method that don't really work thing, this question is also going to illustrate some other things. So let's take a look. Everyone can go through this question. You can put your answers in the chat, but just if you could hold off for a couple minutes before you put your answers in, so that people have a chance to answer the question on their own. That'd be great. And make sure you notice that this is an accept question, by the way, as you're doing it. It's an accept question. Okay, whenever you're ready, you could put your answers in the chat. No, it's a little tricky. Any other opinions? What do you think? Which one would not strengthen the argument? Okay, let's go through this. I want to illustrate what I'm talking about here. So when we do a critical reasoning question, of course, we read the passage. So it says, a new commercial radio station in Greenfield plans to play songs that were popular hits 15 to 25 years ago. So we have one of these construction plan questions. Okay, so let's continue. It hopes in this way to attract an audience made up mainly of people between 35 and 45 years old, and thereby to have a strong market appeal to advertisers. Okay, so that's our first step in answering critical reasoning question. Our second step is to read the question. Each of the following, if true, strengthens the prospect that the radio station's plan will succeed, except. So we're looking for something that strengthens the argument, or the choices that strengthen the argument, except the correct answer will not strengthen the argument. So we're looking for something that doesn't strengthen the argument. And here's what you'll see in a minute why I brought this question. Okay, let's look at choice A. People tend to remain very fond of music that they heard when they were their teens and early 20s. Well, if we do the math, we can see that this does strengthen the argument, because people in their teens and early 20s, 15 to 25 years ago, then they would be 35 to 45 now, right? So this strengthens the argument that they remain fond of music, they're likely to listen to it and thereby make this plan work, right? Okay, so A is out. Let's go to B. In a city demographically similar to Greenfield, some radio stations have succeeded commercially by playing popular music from 15 to 25 years ago. I've heard that in a GMAT critical reasoning question, if a question is about one city, and then an answer choice is about another city, then the answer choice it's not relevant to the argument. So I'm going to keep B, because maybe this is our correct answer, because it says something about a city demographically similar to Greenfield. It also says some radio stations. I've also heard about GMAT critical reasoning that any choice that says some is irrelevant. So I'm definitely keeping B, because it says a city similar and some radio stations. Those are two signs in critical reasoning from what I've heard that a choice is not correct. How about C? There are people in age groups other than the 35-year-old age group who enjoy listening to songs that were hits 15 to 25 years ago. Well, this sounds as if it's going to help the radio station have a bigger listener base, right? Because more people that are than other than 35 to 45 years old age group enjoy listening to these songs. So wouldn't this be good for them? I'm going to keep C too. It's kind of interesting. How about D? The 35 to 45-year-old age group is one in which people tend to have comparatively high levels of income and are involved in making household purchases. Well, this does seem like it's going to help the plan, because the plan is about having a strong market appeal to advertisers. And this one is saying these people are involved in making household purchases. Well, advertisers are going to love that your audience is made up of these people. So this is out. This is definitely a strengthener. How about E? Among the few radio stations in the Greenfield area, there is none that plays music from this particular period more than a few hours per week. Well, this would strengthen the argument too, right? Because no one else is following this plan. So it sounds as if you're not going to have a lot of competition. So E is a strengthener as well. And since this is an accept question, you can get rid of E. Now, what's the deal with these two choices and why did I bring this question? Because here's the deal. If you're really focused on what this thing, the GMAT does, we've all heard, oh, the GMAT does this. In verbal, we hear this all the time. GMAT verbal, we hear the GMAT does this. Being is always incorrect in a sentence correction question. Having is almost always incorrect. If you see a choice with having, it's incorrect. We hear these kinds of things. We hear extreme choices are incorrect. We hear that choices that say some in critical reasoning are incorrect. Okay, so we learn all these things the GMAT supposedly does, right? This is what the GMAT does. And then we see a choice like B and we say, well, that can't be a strengthener because we know that when the GMAT does this, if it talks about another city and it uses the word some, it's irrelevant. And if we did that, we'd say that B isn't a strengthener and we get this question incorrect. And here's why. Because the GMAT has done some things. Doesn't mean the GMAT does those things across the board, okay? So the fact that some is in a lot of incorrect choices doesn't mean that it can't be in a strengthener. And the fact that a city in one question was information about one city wasn't relevant to a question about another city doesn't mean that choice is necessarily relevant, right? It's, information about one city could be relevant about another city. So in this particular case, it's the case that a city demographically similar to Greenfield, some radio stations have succeeded commercially by playing popular music. Well, wouldn't that strengthen you in the real world? If you said, well, I'm going to have a radio station that does this, and there are other radio stations in another city that have done the same thing and have done great, wouldn't that strengthen your argument? Of course it would, right? So actually B is a strength. What about C? We already talked about the fact that there are people in age groups other than 30 to 45 who enjoy listening to songs that were hits 15 to 25 years ago. But let's look at what this plan is about. It says it hopes in this way to attract an audience made up mainly of people between 35 and 45 years old. So that's the plan, right? It's not to attract other people. So regardless of whether they will attract people in other age groups, it's not going to help their particular plan of attracting this audience and thereby having a strong market appeal. So C doesn't help the argument at all and is our correct answer. Okay, so you see what we were, the issue here with this question. Are there any questions about this question before I go on? Okay, so here's the point. The point is, when you're preparing for GMAT Verbal, don't overemphasize what GMAT Verbal did in the past. This so-called what the GMAT does. We all hear about, oh, the GMAT does this. As I was saying, the GMAT does that. Well, let's be super careful because if the GMAT does something that doesn't quite make sense all the time, such as saying that a city, that information about one city has no effect on our opinion of another city, it doesn't necessarily make sense, does it? So just because it sort of somehow showed up in one GMAT question doesn't mean that it's across the board a rule for doing well in GMAT Verbal. The same goes for the word being in sentence correction and a whole lot of other things we hear about what the GMAT does. Look, you know, because being was in a bunch of incorrect answers in some official guide questions from years ago doesn't mean that every answer choice that uses the word being is going to be incorrect. Sure, we want to be careful, but we don't want to overemphasize this stuff. What we do want to do is learn fundamentals that apply to both past GMAT Verbal questions and current ones, okay? Learn fundamentals that apply to all the questions. So if you learn basic subject-verb agreement rules and regarding what's relevant, learn what really constitutes what relevant in an overall sense, not just these little picky things. I mean, sure, you know, if you notice that a city was irrelevant in one question, the information about a city was irrelevant in one question, maybe that will help you out, but you don't want to overemphasize this stuff. So many people go, well, what is parallel? What does the GMAT consider parallel? What does the GMAT consider this? What does the GMAT do? You know, you don't want to do that for your prep. So this is a huge thing as you're preparing for the GMAT, that if you know this one particular thing, you can save yourself a lot of time in GMAT Verbal. Learn fundamentals, learn key strategies, apply to everything, and don't overemphasize memorizing what GMAT Verbal did in the past. And the other thing we saw in that question was, you know, that once again, we're revisiting this whole thing about not being too gimmicky, right? Don't just, oh, it says some, so it's out, right? The answer choice is too extreme, so it's out. Oh, this says however, so it shows that this passage says this exact thing. This is all too gimmicky, too simple. You don't want to do that. You want to treat this test as a sophisticated test of reasoning, okay? Okay, next thing. Next thing is, don't think of GMAT Verbal as subjective, vague, or depending on luck. We hear this all the time, and there's some reasons why we hear it. One is that in the past, it's true. In the past, there were some GMAT sentence correction questions that were not very well written. So it's true, it was a little subjective. It's absolutely the case that in the past, before 2010, when the GMAT changed the provider of practice or of test questions, there were some sentence correction questions that weren't very good. But these days, 99.9% of the time, they're not subjective, they're not vague, and they don't depend on luck. Rather, the questions are pretty much as precise as quant questions, okay? They're as precise just like quant questions. So if you see them that way, then you're going to do much better in GMAT Verbal for a couple of reasons. One is if you're really great at quant, you're going to be like, wait a minute, this is more like quant than I thought. And you can start applying the type of thinking that you do use for GMAT Quant in GMAT Verbal. This is going to help you a lot, okay? You know, you're going to feel so much more confident and you can apply the right kind of thinking. Another reason is because you're gonna just treat the questions as they're meant to be treated, right? That's how they're written. They're written precisely, and they're meant to be answered that way. So not only are you going to be more confident, but you're going to be doing what makes sense in the context of these questions. I see a few comments coming in, so let me see what's going on. Okay, someone's asking for this previous question regarding choice E. Isn't it possible that because the other stations have not bothered to do it, might be not that good of a strategy at all? You know, that's too much. We're kind of taking, when we're answering a GMAT critical reasoning question, we really want to take our reasoning like steps, that one step at a time, and not go a step beyond. So conjecturing that they don't do it is going a little too far with their reasoning. It's gone a little too far afield, saying, oh, well, maybe it's bad. You know, we don't know why they don't do it, so we can't really bring that in. Yeah, so E is a strengthener because it shows that the station is unique. But remember, this is an accept question. It's an accept question. So we are looking for something that is not a strengthener as the correct answer. C says there are people other who listen. Doesn't that mean that the people from 35 years old listen too? Well, it says they enjoy listening to the songs. Yeah, it says there are people who enjoy listening to the songs. It's true. But the fact that there are people who enjoy listening to songs, you know, that's the main point of C, right? That there are people, and we can assume that, you know, the people 35 to 40 years old, I enjoy listening to songs. Well, maybe I take that back. But the fact that there are people other than those people who enjoy listening to songs doesn't really strengthen the argument. And the fact this just sort of tangentially suggests that the 35-year-old and 45-year-old enjoy listening to songs doesn't really strengthen the argument. In fact, it doesn't even say that the 35 or 45-year-old actually enjoy listening to songs, right? It says that other people enjoy listening to them. So C doesn't strengthen the argument. In option C, since we have no information about the target audience, Yeah, we do have information about the target audience, and it's right here, right? We're looking for an audience of 35, mainly of people 35 and 45 years old. So that's the target audience. So that gets rid of it. Okay, so let's continue on. Okay, so here's what we were saying. We got to see the questions as precise like quant questions, okay? They're precise, just like quant questions. So I'm going to show you another question. I want you to think of it in these terms, and we're going to see how, even though it might seem super hard or very vague or unclear how you're supposed to answer it, it turns out to be just as precise as a quant question. So once again, if you could hold off putting your answers in the chat for at least a minute, that'd be great. Just look at this and treat it like a quant question. See how precise it is, and look for precise reasons to eliminate the choices. Obviously, answer choice E got transposed from a different question. Okay, any other opinions? We got a couple. Okay, let's go through this and see what's going on. And I want to see how precisely this works if you know the rules and you know how to do these questions, just as if it were a quant question. Okay, let's read the original version. A star will compress itself into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole after it passes through a red giant stage, depending on mass. Okay, so what do we do with this choice? You have to read it carefully and know the rule, okay? That this last, a participial phrase, and this is covered in the target test prep chapter on modifiers, a participial phrase at the end of a sentence like this, it modifies the preceding subject and verb, okay? So this modified, a star will compress itself. Okay, so a star will compress itself depending on mass. So it sounds as if the star is compressing itself by depending on mass. And that meaning doesn't make sense. So even though this kind of seems correct and might sound like something we've heard people say, it really, if we're very precise about it and we know the rules, it completely doesn't make sense. So this is not subjective. It's not, it's just a clear issue of something. A star will compress itself depending on mass, okay? Doesn't make any sense. Okay, and we could also read the whole thing. A star will compress itself into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole after it passes through a red giant stage, depending on mass. So it's saying that it'll compress itself into all these things, you know, or one of these things, depending on mass. It's not clear, right? It's not a clear way of saying it. So it's not subjective. We can't say that a star will compress itself depending on mass. Let's look at B. After passing through a red giant stage, depending on its mass, a star will compress itself. Well, look at this again. It does the same thing. The star will compress itself depending on its mass. Now, I know we can all tell what this sentence is meant to say. As depending on the mass, I'm not even sure how to say it honestly in the moment here, but we're trying to say, depending on what its mass is, one of these different things will happen, right? But this is saying that depending, as if like depending, like I'm depending on you, depending on something, the star is depending on its mass, the star will compress itself. Okay, so whereas we might have thought that this question, well, this is so subjective, I don't know what's wrong, all these choices look right to me. If you know the rules and you know that this modifier here has to modify what comes after it, subject and verb, after passing through a red giant stage, depending on its mass, a star will compress itself as if it's depending on its mass. This might slide by if you're talking to somebody, but it doesn't on the GMAT. It's not precisely correct. How about C? After passing through a red giant stage, a star's mass will determine if it compresses itself into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole. So now look at what this one is saying. After passing through a red giant stage, a star's mass. So this looks as if it's saying that the star's mass was passing through a red giant stage. Well, a mass is a weight, type of thing. It's a measure. A measure can't go through a red giant stage. So this might sound right and it might feel right, and you might, think it's correct if you just read it quickly, or certainly understand what the writer meant by it. But in GMAT sentence correction, we're looking for what makes sense as written. It's called verbal reasoning. We have to reason our way through it. So even if we can tell what it means, it doesn't make sense. The other thing is if, this is a little more picky of a rule, star's mass will determine if it compresses himself. We discussed this in the course, but we really need a whether there rather than if. Okay, so you do need to learn some rules, but this isn't just something the GMAT does, by the way. This is a universal rule. It makes more sense to use whether rather than if. Okay, so that's out too. So we're left with one choice. Thank goodness we didn't, the incorrect choice from another question didn't get transcribed into the correct answer. So let's take a look at this. Mass determines whether a star, and we can cross off this modifier, as you will learn if you use the course. Mass determines whether a star will compress itself into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole. This effectively conveys the meaning, right? The star's mass determines whether, not if, the star will compress itself into one of these things. It's very well written, okay? It's perfectly written and expresses the meaning very clearly. Okay, so there's our correct answer. But the main point here is not about this question or the specific rules that are in it, because you can learn those rules anywhere. The main point is noticing how, even though many of these choices might look correct if you read them quickly, and they all sound like things we might say, and they're hard to tell the difference, if you know the rules and you know how to apply them, and you have practice looking for what you need to look for, and you do it precisely as if this were a quant question, you will get it correct. And this is a hard question. Only about half of people get this correct normally. Okay, So you can see how being precise is really going to help. Now, are there any questions about this question before we move on? And while we're waiting on those questions, the key thing with this, okay, this participial phrase is one thing you definitely want to know. These present participial phrases for GMAT Verbal, okay? So definitely focus on that as you're learning about modifiers. You definitely want to get those clear. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. If they come in later, we can come back to this. But anyway, you get the idea. As you're preparing for GMAT Verbal, keep this in mind. This is going to keep you on the straight and narrow to getting your score goal. Okay. The next thing, this is on a sort of whole different topic. Don't think that getting most of the questions correct is good enough. Now, someone the other day came and was talking about his GMAT, and he said, gosh, he missed something like 10 quant questions and he scored 47 in quant. That works great in quant. You can practically miss half the questions and still get a score in the 40s in quant. You can miss, I don't know, I think you might be able to miss 7 questions and get a 50 in quant. You don't have to get all the quant questions correct to score high in quant, or even to get above 40 in quant. Not at all. So when people are practicing verbal, they often go through the official guide and say, I got most of the official guide questions correct. It's not going to work. Verbal is a little different, okay? In verbal, we have to get a high percentage of the questions correct to score high. To get a 48 in verbal, you have to get all the questions correct but one. You can miss just one question of knock you down to a 48. You might be able to get a 49 or 50 with one miss. But anyway, often one missed question in verbal gets you to V48. So you can see that getting most of the questions correct isn't good enough. To get a 40, you need to get about all but maybe 5 or 6 questions correct a lot of the time. Okay, that's way more than just most of the questions. So when you're practicing verbal, you have to shoot for very high accuracy. Okay, and we're talking about on easy questions close to 100%. Medium questions, at least 80%, and better off 90%. And hard questions, 70% would be great. You could, in some cases, you could get 60% if you want to get about a 30 and 38 in verbal. But anyway, you can see these are much higher accuracies than you need to achieve in quant. And let's see why. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, on the left side here, somebody got a V33. Okay, this is from somebody's enhanced score report. It shows on the top, we see the percentage of questions this person got correct in each part of the verbal section by quarter, and on the bottom, the difficulty of the questions, right? So now look at V33. That's most of the questions correct. If we do the math, this person got 20 out of 30 questions correct. If you did that in quant, you'd be in the upper 40s. In verbal, in this case at least, the person was in the low 30s, right? So getting most of the questions correct is not going to work. The other thing we can notice is look at the difficulty, right? These questions, the difficulty of the questions the person was getting correct is all medium or even a little below. That's not going to work either, okay? So here's the deal. And here's why, by the way. You see this person missed a bunch of questions at the beginning. When you miss questions at the beginning, the section starts off with easier questions. So you kind of knock your difficulty level down for the whole, for at least the beginning of the section, and it might be hard to recover. Okay, so this person got about 2/3 of the questions correct, okay, but didn't get hard enough questions correct, and ended up with a 33 in verbal. So this illustrates that, look, getting most of the questions correct in the official guide isn't going to do it, partly because official verbal questions in the official guide are not that hard. Only toward the end of the guide do they start getting hard. So you can go, oh, I got most of the official guide questions correct. Yeah, a lot of them are easy, okay? So now let's look at this V40. This person didn't get that many more questions correct, but did get 9 total questions correct. So got a little more questions correct, but look at the difficulty level. Okay, the difficulty level is much higher. So this person was getting all the medium questions correct. And just see what the person was missing. Was missing these harder level questions, right? So this can really guide you regarding what you need to do when you're practicing for GMAT Verbal. You have to get the easy and medium questions, as I was saying. Basically, you want to be able to get practically 100% of easy verbal questions correct. Okay, basically 100%. Medium questions, 90% would be great. You could see that this person got this higher score, even though, by the way, missed as many questions in the beginning here, right, as the other person, but was getting medium and easy, medium questions. Didn't even see any easy questions. If you're scoring this high, you won't even see any. Look, there's nothing below here. You won't even see any easy questions. That's why you need to be getting. So this person got, yeah, like maybe 70% of the questions correct, roughly, and but didn't see any medium questions. So 70% or more of the hard and medium questions you need to be getting correct. So when you're practicing, how are you going to get 70, 80% of the medium and hard questions correct? Well, that's 90% of the medium practice questions and 80% of the hard practice questions, right? Or maybe 90 and 70. So when you're practicing GMAT Verbal, shoot for these high levels of accuracy. And how are you going to do this? Don't do all your practice time. Okay, don't start off doing all your practice time. Yeah, this is a time test. I'm gonna have 1 minute and 48 seconds per question. Okay, so I'm gonna do all my practice time, give myself 2 minutes per question. I'm really gonna learn this. It's never gonna work, because you're not gonna learn how to do it in 2 minutes. I mean, you saw what we needed to do for the 2 practice questions we looked at. The critical reasoning question, you had to go through all those choices carefully and see these subtle nuances. For the sentence correction question, you had to apply all these different rules, really see what's going on with the different choices, right? It's going to take more than 2 minutes when you're beginning. So if you do all your practice time, you'll never learn how to do it. You'll just keep getting, yeah, you'll get 60% of the questions correct. And you won't even be sure why a lot of the time. So don't do all your practice time. Do a lot of it untimed. So first, achieve high accuracy on time, right? Before seeking to answer questions at test pace. So with the accuracies I was talking about, the 90, 80, 60, or 90, 80, 70, or 100, 90, 100 in easy would even better, 90 in medium, 70 in hard. Achieve those accuracies on time before seeking to answer the questions at test pace. You can always learn to speed up, okay? You can figure out how to speed up if you're getting them correct at high accuracy first. But if you speed up first, then it's really tough. And by the way, the same skills that get you the questions correct with that high accuracy are going to help you speed up. So think of it that way. Look, when you're getting them correct, you're learning to do them fast as well. Okay, I see a couple of questions coming in. I don't remember what, so someone's asking about choice E, the last question. I don't remember what it was offhand. Maybe if you hit me with an email at marty@targettestprep.com, I could send you the question, or you could Google it and you'll find the question. How can we differentiate the difficulty of verbal questions? It's based on subtype or each type of question. The difficulty for the different types of questions, like, so there are easy, medium, and hard sentence correction questions. There's easy, medium, and hard modifiers questions. There are easy, medium, and hard subject-verb agreement questions, right? So really, it's just going to be that you have to have a source that tells you whether the questions are difficult. You can't tell by the style of the question. I mean, some like bold-faced questions tend to be harder. Modifiers questions tend to be harder. But there's easy bold-faced questions, there are easy modifiers questions. So you can really only tell by just having a resource that sort of tells you which questions are the hardest ones, categorizes them for you. I mean, yeah, you could figure it out a little bit on your own, but you get the idea. Okay. What's the next topic? So as long as we're talking about practicing on time, this is going to be key too. If you want to nail verbal, you're just beginning to prepare for GMAT Verbal, this is going to save you so much time. Don't guess between the last 2 choices of a GMAT Verbal reasoning practice question, okay? Here's the deal. GMAT Verbal comes down to choosing between the last 2 choices. When you read the passage in a critical reasoning question, when you read the answer choices in a sentence correction question, what you're doing really is you're setting yourself up to easily eliminate 3 choices and then get down to those last 2 choices. And that's where the game begins. You're all set up now. You know the parts of the argument, you know the rules, whatever it is. I'm ready to eliminate one of those last two choices, that's the game. So if you're practicing and you guess between the last two choices, guess what? You're actually not practicing the game. It's like showing up for a concert as a band, practicing for the concert, but you never play the songs. All you do is dress up and set up the microphones and everything else. And you don't play the songs at all. That's our rehearsal, because this is where the game begins, is the last two choices, okay? That's when the game of GMAT Verbal begins. So when you are practicing GMAT Verbal, here's what you want to do instead, is it's what it says right here: stick with the question, untimed, as we were saying, until you can clearly articulate why each choice is incorrect or correct. So when we're practicing GMAT Verbal, what we're really doing is learning to create explanations. We're learning to explain these questions as an expert would, right? So you want to be able to say, well, each one of these choices, choice A is incorrect for this reason, choice B is incorrect for this reason, choice C, D, E, all the same thing. And finally, one will be choice E is correct for this reason. So you want to differentiate and you want to articulate. This is so key, exactly why each choice is incorrect or correct. And here's the thing. If, let's say, oh, my accuracy is pretty good in verbal, it's 70%, but you can't do this, clearly articulate why each choice is incorrect, you're kind of lucking into some questions. This happens so often, and people come to me on the in-course chat from Target Test Prep and say, man, I was getting most of the questions correct, as we talked about, and then I went and took the test, and I got really rocked. I scored in the 20s on verbal. What happened? And the thing is, if you don't learn to clearly articulate what's going on with each choice, that's when you get rocked and you're like, gosh, I don't even know it, because you don't have it all clear at that point. So anything can happen, right? Anything can happen. You can end up, maybe you're scoring 35 on one practice test and 25 on the next and 30 on the next. What is going on? Because everything isn't clear to you. You're locking into the choices, right? So we need to, and don't guess between the last two choices. Learn to play that game and stick with each question until you can clearly articulate why each choice is incorrect or correct. And honestly, I've seen people do 10 verbal practice questions a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, and score quite high on GMAT Verbal because they were learning to do all of this, right? They're learning to do all of this 10 questions at a time. So that's what's really going to work for you. Let's see some more questions coming in. What should we do when we run out of time? I mean, there's two answers to that. One is, and I assume you're talking about when you're taking the test, just, obviously, if you're taking the test and you're running out of time, guess on the last few questions so you don't get the penalty for not even answering them at all. But honestly, you should be going through the section, and if you have a really hard time with the question, just ditch it, right? So there's the second answer, is when you're actually taking the test, you should have some awareness of when you're bogging down. It's taking me 2, 3, it's going to be 4 minutes. Ditch the question if you're bogging down and you're not going to get to the answer in the next 30 seconds. But third of all, you could read. I have a blog post on how to speed up in GMAT Verbal. If you Google that, you can read about some different techniques you can use to speed up. But mainly, what you're going to do to speed up is achieve high accuracy when you're practicing, so you don't run out of time when you take the test. Because if you achieve that high accuracy and you learn to do these questions with precision, you'll answer them quickly. Okay, next question. I got 67% of verbal questions correct and still got V28. What's the explanation for that? Yeah, well, 67% is going to land you probably somewhere in the, it could be anywhere from the upper 30s to the 20s. So, and here's why: because if you miss some questions at the beginning, you'll get easier questions, and because the beginning questions are medium questions, so if you get one of those wrong, you get a slightly easier one, and then maybe you get a slightly easier one, and now your difficulty level is trending along at fairly easy, right? So now you get 2/3 of the questions correct. The difficulty level is going to hang out right in there. Okay, so and if you get just medium questions correct, it's going to be super hard to score above the 20s or the low 30s, right? You have to be getting some harder questions correct. So if you're trending along at a relatively easy difficulty level, even if you get 2/3 of the questions correct, you're still going to score in the upper 20s or the low 30s. Okay, because it's the difficulty level matters as well. Got some more questions coming in. I can clearly articulate why the choice to correct used to stay calm, not rushing. Okay, so yeah, if you're used to, so a lot of people, when you do the untimed practice, you learn to articulate why each choice is correct or incorrect. But then I've had this happen to me. I was practicing untimed, and then I started taking practice tests, and I'm used to spending 10 minutes per question. It's like, whoa, what do I do now? And you're hanging out with the questions, and of course the time runs out on you. So you need to do some time practice, but you don't necessarily have to cut yourself off at 2 minutes per question or a minute 48 per question. What you want to do instead is start working the time down, right? Figure out how to be more efficient. Like if you're doing RC passages, there's different ways to be more efficient in reading them. And we discussed these in the course, right? Well, how can you read an RC passage and get through it faster and still get the information you need? What can you do to be more efficient? And this is why, from the beginning, I said something about learning strategies, because strategies will help you answer the questions faster. Yeah, you can get them correct in 5 minutes, but if you have a good strategy, you know exactly what to do. Step 1 is this, step 2 is that. You'll bang through the questions. All of this is discussed in the blog post I was talking about in the on how to speed up in GMAT Verbal. So you might want to check those. But basically, you have to learn to get through the questions more efficiently. And one more thing that I've seen people do that is pretty cool for practicing, practice questions, like do a question timed, give yourself a minute, 48 seconds or 2 minutes, right? And then keep going with the question on time. So you're doing timed and untimed practice at the same time. So when you get to 2 minutes, choose your answer and then stick with the question now as long as it takes and see if you get a different answer. Okay, I'm going to move on from and wrap this up and maybe come back to some more questions as we do that, after I do that. Okay, one final thing I want to say is don't think you have a score ceiling, okay? Do have a growth mindset and understand that effective preparation results in score increases. And here's the thing, we all hear about these score ceilings, right? Not everybody believes in them, but a lot of people do. And I hear people say, I've been preparing and preparing. I think I have a score ceiling because my score isn't going up. Just your score is not going up because you need to change how you've been preparing, right? Okay, if it's not going up, find something new to do. Maybe you're missing a whole set of rules. Maybe the way you're executing, maybe you need to learn some new strategies. Whatever it is, have a growth mindset and understand that effective preparation works, right? Effective preparation results in score increases. So now someone's asking, I scored 700. What do I need to do to improve my score to 740 plus? How do I approach the same? Well, number one, have a growth mindset. Number two, find ways to prepare effectively. And that kind of goes a little beyond the scope of this discussion. But for verbal, you've seen what we need to do. Okay, increase your verbal score by learning some new strategies, as we talked about, learning the concepts, and then practicing, as we discussed. And the same thing will work for Quant. Okay, learn concepts, learn strategies, then practice untimed first and time second, right? Achieve high accuracy first. And if you miss a question, figure out why. Go back and review what you need to review so you don't miss the same type of question the next time, and come back and do some more practice. This method just increases your score point by point, right? So yeah, if you're at 700, you want to get to 740, learn new concepts, learn new strategies, practice on time until you achieve high accuracy. And if you miss a question, figure out why and address it, and then practice time, and then go to the next topic and do the same thing, one topic at a time. It works every time. And if you think you have a score ceiling, hey, hit me with an email and I'll convince you don't, and we can figure out what you need to do, right? And effective preparation results in score increases. And this is what we've discovered with the Target Test Prep course, right? A lot of this stuff, I mean, Scott started this course by saying, well, what are the best methods for teaching? What are the best methods for preparation? Doing all this research. When I first met Scott, he was showing me all these books, like, well, this is the best way to prepare. This is the best way. This is how people learn the best. If you prepare effectively, it's going to work, okay? If you have good methods, it's going to work. That's why we don't use gimmicky methods, right? That's why we don't try to just learn everything that GMAT did in the past. Just effective preparation results in score increases. Any more questions? Someone's asking, this is an interesting question I hear a lot. What do you do to make sure you get the first 10 questions correct? Well, you don't want to spend a lot of extra time in the first 10 questions. Honestly, the first 10 questions, at least the first, let's say 6 or 7, are medium questions. So what do? Treat them as medium questions and get them correct as you would any other medium question. And by the way, you could see some medium hard or medium type of questions later in the section too. Your goal in preparing is to be prepared to get basically all the medium questions correct. So to get the first 10 questions correct, really the move is to prepare effectively to get medium questions correct. And that's why we were talking about, okay, you want to, when you're practicing, getting 90% or more of the medium questions correct is going to be really good. Yeah, if anybody, yeah, someone's asking if you can share your ESR, please do. I'd be happy to take a look at it for you. Okay, so you get the basic idea of how to prepare for GMAT Verbal. We're going to treat these verbal questions with respect because they're sophisticated questions, right? And that's going to help you a lot. You're not going to use gimmicks, but rather you're going to use solid strategies, and you're going to practice shooting for super high accuracy that involves using precision thinking, precise thinking to find your way to the correct answers. And you see the results. I mean, as far as the growth mindset goes, I know Dalal didn't do this in 3 months, go from 250 to 780. But there's a growth mindset for anybody that is wondering whether, well, I started off at a low level. Dalal's first GMAT score was 250. Her second GMAT score was 350. I'm not saying that you want to do that, or you want to spend as much time as she did, or you even want to get to 780, but it does prove a point. And of course, these other 2 people also prove the point that, look, effective preparation gets the results we want. So if anybody wants to sign up for the Target Test Prep course, by the way, you can try it for 5 days for $1. You can see the entire course. We don't hold anything back. So I would encourage you, if you want to find effective ways to prepare, learn all the different rules for verbal, and have an organized with a study plan, the whole bit. You'll be all set up to just get through this as efficiently as possible and master GMAT Verbal. You can do that and see it all by signing up for the 5-day trial. So I really appreciate you all coming out today. It's been a blast. I always love talking about this stuff. I think one more thing we could say about GMAT Verbal is don't dread GMAT Verbal. Treat it as a game. Enjoy it. See it as an opportunity to enhance your writing, your reading, your attention to detail, even the way your logical thinking. All these things they'll benefit from this, and you can treat it as a game and enjoy it, because the more we enjoy what we're doing, the better it goes for us. Yep, and someone's saying, as we wrap up, it takes a lot of patience. It does. It can take a lot of patience. Don't expect it to be easy, but it still can be fun and a great challenge. And with that, I wish you all a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week, and happy studying.